Hey everybody, ignore the messed up hair. I just woke up and I'm not feeling that great. So I saw Gladiator 2 the other night, and I was going to do my review yesterday for it. But after I did my review, I really got to thinking more and more about the movie. So this is one of those movies. It took me a couple days to really think about and digest before I felt that I could give an honest opinion on it. I'm going to start off by saying that the movie overall, it wasn't terrible. Okay, but it's not without its faults, and it definitely has a lot of them. I think the biggest issue that this movie has, though, is Gladiator 1. Gladiator 1 is a fucking masterpiece. From start to finish, it's one of the best action movies, historical movies. Obviously, it wasn't 100%, historically accurate by any means, and it took a lot of different liberties. But the movie itself was just a good movie. It played well to all the characters. They casted it really well. Russell Crowe was an amazing Maximus. So this movie had a lot to live up to. And that, more than anything, is where it fell short. I'm going to give some minor spoilers for the movie, so if you don't want to know anything about the movie, I'd probably just stop the video right here. So before you go, I'll just leave you with this. Like I said, it's not a terrible movie. I wouldn't waste my money to go to the theater to see it because it doesn't hold up. I would wait for it to come on something that's on demand, like Netflix or HBO, so that you can watch it without having to spend any extra money. So, if you remember in the first one, there was a young boy named Lucius, and it was Commodus's nephew, and I forget his sister's name. And at the end of the first Gladiator, Maximus dies, and he says, Lucius is safe, and he sacrificed himself not just for the betterment of Rome, but for someone that he used to care about and her child, so that they could be safe, because he really wanted to look after them. In the first Gladiator, they made it a point for Maximus to kind of ask, is that his son? And she pretty much says, no, it's not. Now, it was never said in those words. It was hinted at, and her denial was also inferred. In this movie, however, I feel as if they completely retconned that because they said it, that Lucius's father was not his father at all because his father was actually gay, surprise, surprise, and that a lot of people thought that Commodus, Joaquin Phoenix's character, was Lucius's father. Well, come to find out that Maximus is his father. And there's even one point where she tells Lucius, Maximus, he's always loved you. He cared about you, and he wanted you to be safe. Blah 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 blah. And if you go back to the first Gladiator and remember, the only thing Maximus cared about was getting back. Well, he cared about Rome. So there's two things he cared about. He cared about the dream that Marcus Aurelius had for Rome to make it a better place, and the other thing he cared about was revenge, but getting to see his wife and son again, and that was really important to him. It was his wife and his son the whole time. That's all he really cared about. While he looked after Lucius, he looked, to help Lucius. He didn't look to Lucius like a son. So it was very strange to put this dynamic in the movie that Maximus always cared about him, always loved him, and all that stuff. It was a little strange. And so this movie opens up with there's a battle in a place called Numidia, and that's where Lucius has fled because they show you at the end of Gladiator 1, as soon as Maximus is being wheeled off the battlefield, she runs and puts him on a horse and has somebody take him away because he's in danger since he's the next in line to be emperor, which it didn't make a lot of sense to me because she already had this stuff ready. Okay. So that was, like I said, one of my biggest issues was the amount of things that they had to retcon. So anyway, Lucius is settled in a place called Numidia, and he's got a wife, and the Romans come to invade, and they fight, and they lose the battle. The Romans killed his wife. Pedro Pascal, specifically, he plays a general, and he says, shoot her, and it's Lucius's wife. So Lucius feels that he is directly responsible for the death of his wife. So he is on a conquest. He wants to kill him. So Lucius gets taken as a prisoner and then sold as a slave. And of course, just like Maximus, he doesn't fight in the beginning, and they get him to fight. And this is where the movie kind of jumped the shark, and which is ironic because I'm going to talk about literally jumping the shark later. They brought out in this little coliseum, they made the slaves fight baboons. And I don't know what's going on with the special effects in the world lately, but these special effects were just terrible. The baboons looked worse than Gollum from Lord of the Rings. If you remember going back and watching Gollum in Lord of the Rings, he looked pretty good. You go back and you watch even Iron Man, which is unfortunately like 20 years ago. These movies had computer animations that were just spot on, looked real. This computer animation looked terrible. Like these baboons just, I don't know what it was. They didn't look like real baboons. And that was a weird thing because they were trying to make them like hyper realistic. And I think that's the problem. Back even in Gladiator 1, when the tigers came out, you could kind of tell the tigers weren't really there, but they did look like real tigers. And then when a tiger swiped, they used like a puppet hand paw to do part of it. And that really added somehow to the realism. Even though he didn't really get slashed by a tiger, it still looked real. It was enough to fool your mind. When you see just a troop of baboons come out, and I don't care how badass you are, you're not winning against a troop of baboons. It's just not gonna happen. And I can suspend my disbelief for a lot of different things. And this is where the second problem with the movie came in. The fight scenes, half the time, looked very choreographed. Like if you go back to the first Gladiator, the fight scenes looked chaotic. You didn't know who was going to shoot who was going to stab who, like what was going on. Even on the one-on-one battles that Maximus had, they still didn't look choreographed. They looked, so they may have looked fluid, or even if you go back to like Revenge of the Sith with Obi-Wan and Anakin, that entire lightsaber duel, they worked for a very long time to get that perfect. But in the movie, it didn't look choreographed. It looked like they were just having a beautiful dance of blades. In this movie, a lot of the fights looked like I was watching a WWE wrestling match. And I think this is because, and a little known fact about me, I used to be a professional wrestler about 20 years ago out of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And some of the moves they did, like, one guy picks one dude up, Angle slams him on, and he goes through a table. And I'm like, all right, well, that's ridiculous. Because if you know anything about table smashes, the second you go through the table, it actually softens the blow. So you're better off if the table breaks than, the table not breaking, and that's actually going to hurt you. Another point during one of the Gladiator matches, they gave him like a suplex, but the way the guy landed, he landed on the upper part of his shoulders and, completely protecting his head and his neck, and he rolled with it. So there were definitely a lot of physical moves in this, and I was like, wow, this is terrible. There was one point where Pedro Pascal's got this long sword. It's got a long hilt on it, but you can see it bending, so it's already broken, but he's trying to hide it on camera. The guy that plays Lucius picked up a shield, and the shield wiggled like rubber. So there was a lot of stuff like that just, I think, should have been caught at the editing floor. There's one scene where they flood the Colosseum, which, historically speaking, is actually accurate. They did have the ability to flood the Colosseum, which I think is super cool. However, somehow, they put a shit ton of sharks in the water. And I mean a shit ton of sharks. And so, somebody gets cut, they go over, blood goes in the water, and the shark just goes into like a fucking frenzy, which didn't make a lot of sense. I don't see the shark. That was another thing. The shark was able to tear and rip through the armor like it was butter. And I would have no problem with that, except for later on, there's another scene that really contradicts the sturdiness of the armor, or the not so sturdiness of the armor. I don't know how they got the sharks in and out of the Colosseum. And having sharks in the Colosseum really bothered me, because you can't just take some salt water, pour it in a pool, and the sharks are going to be fine. That, especially for how long that they would have had to set that up. And again, like I said, I can suspend disbelief for certain things. And I think my biggest problem with it was the sharks looked like they came out of like Sharknado. And when I say that, I mean the computer animation. They didn't look real. They looked super fake. I felt like I was watching a sci-fi movie on the Sci-Fi Channel. It didn't have what you would expect the textures to be. They looked fake. There's another scene later on that they've got a tiger. The tiger looks fake. There was one scene where a guy was riding a rhino, and that actually didn't look too bad. If I had to guess, he was probably on a horse with motion capture, and maybe that's why it looked a little bit better. But overall, everything looked scripted. The fights look scripted. And I haven't even talked about the story yet. The story itself isn't terrible, but it relies too much on Gladiator 1. So the story, now that we're finally going to talk about that, is Lucius, wants revenge on the general for killing his wife. So when he is sold as a slave, the slave owner is played by Denzel Washington, basically says, whatever you want, I'll give it to you as long as you fight for me in the arena. And he's like, I just want his head. She's like, no problem, I'll bring it to you. And as the movie progresses, of course, he never loses in the arena. He's super awesome because he's the son of Maximus. So why wouldn't he be amazing at everything? It's not like Maximus literally trained his whole life and became a general and did all these amazing war campaigns, took over a whole bunch of different places, and was battle hardened. No, that's just in your blood. You don't have to worry about all that other stuff. So as he's fighting through the arena, his mother comes and basically says, I know who you are. I know you're Lucius. He's like, get out of here. I don't love you. You sent me away. And as an adult, I get as a child, as like a teenager, they might still feel that way. But as an adult, that you would be mature enough to gain the understanding as to why you were sent away, why it was imperative for you to be gone. Because the two emperors that took over, they're twins, and they are fucking psychotic. And I mean, seriously psychotic. They were one of the best parts of the movie. The way these two just played being psychopaths was spot on. I thought it was great. So Denzel Washington starts this political coup. He gets, he gets somebody to be indebted to him. He takes his house. He basically takes his allegiance. He blackmails this person, that person, and he wants to be the emperor, whether it's in front as the actual emperor or behind as the puppet master. That's his goal. So through all these political connections, through all this, they end up finding out that there's a plot to overthrow the emperors. Surprise, surprise. It's the same exact plot as the first one. Lucius's mother is point and center, but so is Pedro Pascal's general. The difference is General Maximus was very loyal to Rome. This general is more loyal to himself. He doesn't like what he's doing, so he wants to overthrow them. He's got 5,000 men from Antioch ready to come down and help. It's the same exact story from the first one. So once they find that out, they make him a gladiator like Maximus, put him in the ring, and then he has to fight Lucius. Now, he knows who Lucius is. Lucius knows who he is. And because of this, they start fighting. And this was all set up by Denzel Washington to, basically honor the deal he made. He said he wanted his head. He brought you his head. Well, they end up fighting to a small point, and then Pedro Pascal goes down to his knees and like, I don't want to fight you. And then Lucius has two swords. He's ready to cut his fucking head off like Anakin cutting off Count Dooku's head. But instead, he puts the swords down and kneels with him. And the Emperor's call for arrows to be shot into Pedro Pascal. And here's another problem that I had. You had a circle of arrows. Circle, okay? And you got these two guys kneeling right in front of each other. And only this guy is being tagged with arrows. I mean, he's being tagged everywhere. Front, back, side, everywhere. Not one hits Lucius. And that was quite annoying to me. Then they made his mother die in the same exact fashion as his wife, like exactly the same, which was also annoying. He ends up donning on Maximus's armor, like, yeah, I'm Maximus too, but he's not. Denzel Washington ends up being pretty successful in his coup, and he gets the Praetorians to start storming after Lucian. Lucian escapes. He goes to get his army, but then it all ends in a battle between Denzel Washington and the actor that plays Lucius. And the problem I had with that was there's one scene where Denzel is with a sword, the Roman sword, here's the thing about the Roman swords, I don't know if you remember, they're straight edge and then they have a very fine point for stabbing. He's got it two hands as hard as he can. He is stabbing Lucius in the chest, right? And the blade it's falling off like it's fucking metal, right? Like tink, tink, tink. What a lot of people don't know about Roman armor, especially a gladiator's armor, it was hard leather. Now, maybe there was a small metal plate in there. I'll give it the benefit of the doubt just for the writing. But nonetheless, even if you were a medieval knight wearing really good plate armor and somebody continued to come down at you, they're going to get through. It's going to happen. You are going to get stabbed. The amount of force that was being put down, Lucian should have been dead. He just kaput. But of course, plot armor is the thickest armor in the world, so he was able to survive. He gets up, he kills, Denzel Washington, and instead of having the two armies fight in this epic battle, which would have been pretty cool, both of them are like, we don't want to fight. There's been enough bloodshed. And I get it to a point. I get there's no reason for them to be in a civil war because Lucius is the true heir. But my thing is, I'm looking at this from a general perspective. Some guy rides up on a horse and is like, I am Lucius Verus. I am the rightful heir of the throne. I'm going to need some kind of proof before I just listen to you. You don't just get to pop. Like 10 other kids probably popped up at some point. Like, I'm Lucius. So I didn't like the fact that he just said who he was and everybody believed it. Like, oh my gosh, it's him. And I just don't see that as being the case. But I'm going to kind of cut it there. I feel like I've sort of vented about it enough. Like I said, the movie, it's not terrible, but it relied too much on Gladiator 1. I think that they should have written it a little bit better, a little bit differently, set it maybe like 100 years in the future, not made Lucius the main character, just made another Gladiator type movie where somebody's captured, they become a wonderful, great gladiator, they rise to the top, and they destroy the evil empire. I think that would have been a better movie. And I know a lot of people would have been like, oh, it's just, it's the same story as Gladiator 1. It still was the same story. The Force Awakens was the same story as A New Hope. Hollywood has pretty much run out of ideas. So if they're going to recreate the fucking wheel, at least, put some chrome on it, make it nice. Instead of just playing it safe or relying on other shit. So, all right, I'm going to cut it there. I think I do have another review I need to do. It's for a game called Visions of Mana, which honestly, I'm just going to say it right here. The game's fantastic. But so hopefully you look forward to that. Take care.